Environmental factors play a massive role in warfare, and terrain is a major aspect of any land environment. Some terrains are more favourable than others, and some change drastically depending on the climate, season, and even time of day. While terrain can, of course, affect aerial and naval warfare, especially when it comes to bombardments and such, it's the army that's up close and personal with the ground. In other words, soldiers, beasts of burden, and other ground vehicles suffer the most while traversing or fighting on crappy terrain. In this video, we're going to discuss some of the worst terrains endured by the soldiers of the Second World War. Deserts are an interesting one because there are multiple terrain types within that biome. Keeping our focus on just sandy deserts, they might feature cliffs, plains, sand dunes, and even salty swamps. Desert temperatures also change drastically from day to night, with days being excruciatingly hot and nights excruciatingly cold. The North African campaign was the largest desert theatre of the war, fought largely by the Italians and Germans against the British and their allies. The heat caused soldiers to burn through their water supplies, and windborne sand got all up in their eyes and lungs. Erwin Rommel summed up the experience pretty well, writing, "It was only with difficulty that we could breathe through a handkerchief held in front of the face, and perspiration poured from our bodies in the unendurable heat." Hellish temperatures, dust, and vast distances were incredibly taxing on vehicles too, meaning maintenance was a constant uphill battle. As per Desert Warfare, German experiences in World War II by Major General Alfred Topper, dust had the greatest effect on motor vehicles. The average lifetime of a Volkswagen engine in the desert was only 12,000 to 14,000 kilometers in comparison with 50,000 to 70,000 kilometers in other theaters of war. This was not due only to the effects of dust, but also to the necessity of driving long distances cross-country in low gears. Flies, fleas, and other insects also hounded soldiers in the millions, and there were scorpions, snakes, and diseases to contend with too. A desert may not be the worst terrain of World War II, but they were, overall, logistical nightmares. Deserts of ice and snow are, in many ways, far worse than sandy deserts. While ice could actually improve troop movement in some situations, moving through the snow was a job best left for the Finns and their ski infantry. Generally, cold weather warfare favors the defending force, which can dig in to maintain warmth and lay waste to an attacking force as they contend with the debilitating terrain. Without special cold weather lubricants and antifreeze, vehicles and weapons can jam up, and without proper shelter and clothing, soldiers can fall prey to all manner of fun things like hypothermia and frostbite. Snowfall reduces visibility, and mines don't work all that well when padded with snow either. Blizzards and strong winds can disrupt radio transmission and thwart aerial recon. Perhaps the most famous example of a cold weather conflict during World War II is the Winter War, which was fought between the Finns and the Soviets in Finland. On the defensive, the Finns had the terrain on their side, and they knew it. They attacked Soviet field kitchens to deny them hot meals, and also rotated out their troops, allowing them some respite from the cold, whereas the Soviets just had to suck it up or freeze to death. And a lot of them did too, with sickness and frostbite accounting for about a third of their 188,000 to 207,000 sick or wounded casualties throughout the conflict. While frozen lakes were easier to traverse than snow or forests, the Finns made special mines they could embed into or under ice sheets to blast open the ice and subject the Soviets to the deathly cold waters beneath. When the Soviets sought another way around, often via forests, the Finns ripped them apart with well-placed machine gun nests and snipers. It took the Soviets a few months to figure out how useful winter camouflage was too, after which they swapped their khaki uniforms for white ones. In the words of John Langdon Davies, a British war correspondent present in the Winter War, every acre of Finland's surface was created to be the despair of an attacking military force. When ice and snow thaw in the warmer seasons, they can create a slushy, muddy terrain that Russians refer to as Rasputitsa, which means something along the lines of time without roads. Expanses of mud, swamps, marshes, and any other boggy terrain in general have to be one of the worst terrains endured by the soldiers of the Second World War. It was especially terrible on the Eastern Front. The mud sucked boots, hooves, wheels, and tracks down into it, bringing ground movement to a grinding halt and gifting soldiers trench foot. As with snow, boggy terrains granted an advantage to the defenders who could cut their enemy down while they were slogging it through the mud. In the words of American historian Lee Baker, most Soviet roads were unpaved. Extremely thick and clinging mud made even the simplest of movement nearly impossible and exhausted men, animals, machines, and fuel. Vehicles with wheels could move only if dragged by tracked vehicles such as tanks, and animals began dying by the thousands from overwork. The incredible effort required just to move slowed the entire front to a crawl. Advancing forces prayed for the weather to get colder so everything would freeze over and they could walk and drive on the ice. Good old Rasputitsa played a critical role in the Battle of Moscow. The battle kicked off early in October 1941, but it wasn't until mid-November that the terrain froze over, allowing the Germans to advance at their usual speed. That first month and a half of cold sludge bought the Soviets the time they needed to fall back, regroup, and ultimately smash the German offensive. We don't have to limit ourselves to natural terrains either. Some of the bloodiest and most devastating battles took place in urban environments. In cities and towns, tactics change. Buildings create cover but also limit fields of view, again providing tactical advantages to the defenders. Urban terrains are ideal for springing ambushes and setting traps, which can become even easier to hide when areas of a settlement have been reduced to rubble. Underground networks such as sewers and subway systems provide the means for a whole new dimension of movement right under the enemy's feet. Snipers have field days in urban terrains. Another major factor to take into consideration is the presence of civilians and non-military combatants. If the defending side cares at all about their civilians, they can be a massive liability. The military might have to evacuate them from the city, a mission in itself, or give far more consideration to the potential collateral damage of every attack they make. Conversely, non-military combatants eager to defend their home might actually work in the defending force's favor. The urban warfare conducted in the Battle of Berlin, for instance, was particularly brutal. Marking the end of the war in Europe, both the Germans and Soviets had plenty of urban warfare experience and adjusted their tactics to fit. Defending snipers and machine gunners fired from roofs and upper story floors that Soviet tanks couldn't reach. They also fired Panzerfausts from cellar windows. Tank-mounted Soviet troops combated this by shredding every window and door they passed with small arms fire and hitting the city's rooftops with AA guns. Rather than go down the middle of the street, the Soviets often fought house to house, killing German soldiers and civilians alike. Flamethrowers were particularly effective. German police, elderly militiamen, and even child soldiers of the Hitler Youth participated in the battle, and all in all, as many as 175,000 civilians wound up dead as a result of it, as opposed to 100,000 German military deaths. The sheer brutality of urban warfare makes this terrain among the worst to fight in, especially for the defenders, who must watch their city burn and people perish. In the words of Berliner Dorothea von Schwannenflügel, the Soviets battled the German soldiers and drafted civilians street by street. As the noise got closer, we could even hear the horrible guttural screaming of the Soviet soldiers. Shots shattered our windows and shells exploded in our garden. We watched from behind the small cellar windows as the tanks and an endless convoy of troops rolled by. It was a terrifying sight as they sat high upon their tanks with their rifles cocked, aiming at houses as they passed. It's important to remember that the horror of these terrains was, to a degree, a subjective thing. Being on the offense in many of these terrains was, without a doubt, far worse than being on the defense. Also, troops who had actually been trained and equipped to fight in a given terrain probably wouldn't have hated it as much as troops who hadn't. We're interested to hear what you think though. Which of the terrains we've covered in this video do you think would have been the absolute worst? Also, are you excited for our second installment on battlefield terrains, in which we'll cover an additional 5 terrains of the Second World War? So make sure you let us know all that and more in the comment section below, and make your predictions on which terrains you think will be in the second part of this video. As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.